So you're thinking of moving to Houston, Texas, but maybe you're a little bit worried about flooding. Now, you may have heard of a hurricane that happened here in 2017 called Hurricane Harvey, or possibly some other flooding events that have happened here in Houston, or maybe a friend's told you, hey, don't move to Houston, it floods. Well, that is a blanket statement. So in today's video, I want to walk you through all the intricacies of the flooding issues that we have here in Houston. That way you can see if Houston is the right place for you, because not everywhere here in Houston floods. And because we have Hurricane Harvey, which was one of the worst storms in recorded history, now we have a reference point moving forward for our clients as to what homes flood and what homes will most likely never flood. So let's get after it right now. If this is your first time to the channel and you want to know everything that there is to know about living here in Houston, Texas, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, tap the bell for notifications. That way you can be the first to know about everything going on right here in Houston, Texas. Now, my name is Ferris, and my team, we get calls, texts, and emails every single day from people just like you that are doing their research online, trying to figure out if Houston is the right place for their next move. So if you're looking to move in a day or a week or even a month or a year, go ahead and give us a call, shoot us a text, or send us an email. That way we can help you make a smooth move right here to Houston, Texas. So let's get straight into it. We're talking about flooding here in Houston today. And when we talk about flooding here in Houston, we have to talk about hurricanes, because if you look on a map, Houston is going to be located just about an hour north of the Gulf Coast. And so Houston is quite a large metroplex, and it actually expands all the way down to the coast to Galveston Island, which is a 26-mile-long barrier island right here in the Gulf of Mexico. So Galveston's fantastic. It's a great place to go hang out during the summer. I think they get almost 6 million tourists just on that small little island every single summer. My family, we own a condo down there. It's a great place to go. That being said, hurricanes are a threat. And so starting in late July, early August, and going all the way through October is hurricane season here in Texas. Now, that doesn't mean that Houston gets hit with hurricanes every single year. More often than not, there will be hurricanes that develop out in the Gulf of Mexico, and then as they get closer to land, they will slow down their strength. They'll become tropical storms. And typically there's some wind and some rainfall, but it's typically not that bad. However, back in 2017, we had one of the worst storms in recorded history here called Hurricane Harvey. And what made Harvey bad wasn't necessarily the wind damage, and it wasn't necessarily the storm surge. It was the fact that once it hit land, it just hovered over Houston for about 7 days. So there were over 40 inches of rainfall here in the Houston area. And so typically anything on the north side of Houston isn't too affected by hurricanes. By the time the hurricane gets up, through downtown Houston, if you're in Katy or the Woodlands or some of the northern suburbs, they really haven't been affected by hurricanes. I grew up here my whole life, and they really didn't seem to be an issue. We had a handful that maybe stick out where we just needed to hunker down for the night. But when we woke up in the morning, there was no real damage, and we went right back to our normal lives. Harvey was different. It hung out, and what ended up happening is some of the lakes in the northern part of Houston and some of the reservoirs, they were already completely full before the storm hit. And so what that means is that when you have, I think it was 27 trillion gallons of rain dumped on Houston with all the new development and all the concrete, the impervious cover, that water just had nowhere to go. And it happened so quick that homes that have never really flooded ever, they flooded during Hurricane Harvey. And so you're probably wondering, how do I navigate that? Well, thankfully, it's unfortunate we had to go through Hurricane Harvey, but thankfully now we have that as a reference point, because Hurricane Harvey was rated an 880-year storm. And what that means is that it's a once in 10 lifetimes storm. And so chances of flooding like Hurricane Harvey are extremely low. And one of the reasons they're extremely low is because it was a freak natural occurrence. But the other reason is because the city of Houston, Harris County, Montgomery County, all the surrounding counties have come up with plans to mitigate the risk that we felt during Hurricane Harvey. So for example, if you're up north, the San Jacinto River is what captures most of the water north of Houston, and it runs up above Conroe. It feeds into Lake Conroe. That's the river that feeds Lake Conroe, and then it heads on over to Lake Houston. So those were the two lakes that had full water when Harvey hit. And so anyways, now they do what's called a seasonal annual lake lowering. So towards the end of summer, around August, when hurricane season's picking up and the summer's kind of coming to an end here in the Conroe area, they will actually lower the lake level a couple of feet so that it's still boatable and usable, but it's a 20,000 acre lake. So that allows to capture a lot of water. And so there won't be as bad of flooding downstream. What happened during Harvey was Lake Conroe was already full. They were letting water out of the dam as fast as possible, and it was just too late. And so there were over $125 billion worth of damage done here in the Houston area. So where does this leave us? Well, we work with clients every single day. A lot of them are relocating from out of state. And what we find is that most of the homes we sell actually never flooded during Harvey. In the entire Houston area, about 200,000 homes flooded. Now, 75% of those homes were actually outside of the 100-year floodplain. This was the first time this has ever really happened here in Houston, and chances are it's the last time, but never say never, but the chances of it happening like that again are extremely rare. So when we're looking at homes for clients and we're looking at homes that possibly flooded during Harvey, the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna look up that seller's disclosure. And the seller's disclosure is the form that the seller fills out here in Texas disclosing everything that they know about the property. And that includes flooding. And so we're gonna look at that disclosure the second you text us an address that you're interested in, and we're gonna see if it flooded. And there's really a couple of options here. If it didn't flood during Hurricane Harvey, and it's not in any kind of floodplain, then you can take a deep breath. There's close to zero chance that that home will ever flood. Now maybe you have a pipe burst or something like that, but as far as natural flooding events go, the general rule is if it didn't flood during Harvey, you're good. And so the second thing that we'll see on some sellers' disclosures is a home that's maybe out of the floodplain that did flood during Harvey, but maybe it just got an inch or two. And what happened to a lot of homes is the streets filled up with water and the homes are built up a little bit higher. And as cars would drive through, these big trucks would drive down the streets, it would cause a wake, and that would actually go up into the seat holes or the weep holes of some of these homes on the lower level of brick. And it was just enough where those homeowners had to rip out the bottom couple feet of sheetrock, replace the flooring, change the insulation, and call it a day. And so many of the homes that happened to are in that number of 200,000 homes that flooded, but the damage wasn't necessarily extensive. And like I said, that will probably never happen again. Alongside of the seasonal annual lake lowering, there have been tons of other efforts to mitigate this risk, like better drainage plans and more retention ponds. And so for all those reasons, those homes that maybe flooded, got a couple inches during Harvey, probably shouldn't scare you away. In fact, you might get a little bit better of a deal on the house because now it's technically flooded once. But if it never flooded in the 30 years it existed prior to Harvey, then you can take a deep breath and feel very comfortable that it probably won't flood again. Now, if you look at the seller's disclosure and a home has flooded multiple times, meaning it got multiple feet during Harvey, and maybe in some of these other floods or hurricanes or rainstorms, it floods, well, chances are it's going to be in the 100-year floodplain. And what the 100-year floodplain means is that there is a 1% chance that that home will flood every single year. And so you can still buy homes in the 100-year floodplain that don't flood, but just know that that's going to be a little bit riskier. And so when we buy in the 100-year floodplain and you have a loan here in Texas, you're typically going to be required to carry flood insurance. Now, flood insurance, it doesn't get too expensive here in Texas, but it ranges anywhere from about $600 to about $1,000 per year for flood insurance. And so when you're looking in those areas, just know the homes are typically going to be less expensive. You're typically not going to find really high-end homes in some of these flood areas. And as far as new construction goes, there are some of you that are looking at new construction and maybe these homes were built after Hurricane Harvey. And so you're asking yourself the question, well, how do I know if this house is going to flood if it's a brand new home? Well, there's a couple things in place that will keep this from happening. First of all, developers, the last thing that new developers want to do is develop homes that are all going to flood. It's a lawsuit waiting to happen. There's plenty of reasons as to why they don't want to do this. And so many of the developers have actually raised the elevation requirements for new homes to be built after Hurricane Harvey. So what that means is any new construction after Hurricane Harvey, the homes are going to be built up higher than previous homes. And so even if there was a terrible natural disaster like Hurricane Harvey again, the way that these new communities are set up is the streets will actually catch the water once the drains back up, and the homes are going to be a couple feet above the street level. And so a lot of the developers now in the Houston area will build a minimum of 1 foot above the 100-year floodplain for the streets, and then typically the homes will be a couple feet above that. So even if you do get a once in a 100-year storm here, the houses are going to be high and dry. And so we have flood maps when we're looking for homes for you. And so alongside looking at the disclosures, the first thing we'll also do is we'll pull up the flood map, and we'll show you on the flood map exactly what where the home's located, if it's in the 100-year floodplain, if it's in the 500-year floodplain, which typically don't flood, or if it's completely out of any special flood hazard areas. And so, like we say, this is important because it'll affect whether or not you want to get flood insurance. Now, after Hurricane Harvey, a lot of people that their homes, chances are, will never flood, they still carry flood insurance just for the peace of mind. Now, I live in a neighborhood that backs up to the San Jacinto River, but I know that my home is high and dry and will never flood, and I don't personally choose to carry flood insurance. But at the end of the day, we want our clients to do whatever they feel most comfortable with. And so when you're looking to move to the Houston area, there's a couple general rules for looking at flooding. There isn't a way on our searches that we set up for you to just weed out all of the homes that have flooded. For whatever reason, the local MLS here didn't want us to be able to discriminate this way. And so what that means is that when you find a home that you like, we just look it up real quick. We see if it's in the floodplain, we see if it's flooded, and then we relay that info to you. And so we know the general areas that flooded during Harvey and what didn't flood. And so a member of our team will be able to help navigate that for you. But chances are, if you're looking at new construction, it's not going to be an issue. And if you're looking at a resale home that didn't flood during Hurricane Harvey, then it's also not going to be an issue. And so I hope that gives you a really good idea of how the flooding works here in the Houston area. You really should take a deep breath and not let it scare you from moving to Houston, because there are plenty of areas that didn't flood during Hurricane Harvey. And like we say, the majority of the homes that we sell as a team typically don't end up being any of those homes that have flooded. And so if you're looking to move to the Houston area, like we always say, give us that call, shoot us that text, or send us that email. That way we can help you make a smooth move right here to Houston, Texas. We'll see you guys in the next video.